Okay, what a statement to make that was. What is the statement? What is the statement that I'm even talking about? Here's my statement. Ready? Here's the thesis. Scream 3 is how I would have ended Star Wars. Um, I'm not, the final 3 movies are kind of flawed. The ending of the end of episode 9 works really well. But I think that if you're going to tell this long, arching, gaping story, there needs to be closure at the end of the story. I have to feel some sense of closure and freedom from the chains of needing to know what is happening, what is going down in said story, and that is difficult, especially when you take off in this big jumbo plane. You got to land the plane. You can't just crash and burn, like so many things do. Look at Game of Thrones. I think the final scene in the very last episode of the last season was a good place to end on for something like Game of Thrones, because how do you really end anything like that? But I mean, that last season was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare season. It will always be viewed as a nightmare season. Here's the thing, too. If you're telling this big, long story, like many movies, many episodes, many seasons, your whole story could be the best story in the world. You could tell this incredible thing, but if it doesn't end right, it's never going to be remembered as this great thing, or its memory is always going to be tarnished by the fact that that it bombed, that the thing bombed with the ending. And that's how a lot of people feel about, I mean, Star Wars has multiple endings. If you think about it, the whole trilogy, the final trilogy, the new sequel trilogy that came out, that is the ending itself. That trilogy is the ending. And then episode 9 is an ending. And it's not only an ending to the final trilogy, but it's also an ending to all 9 films. And then the final scene of episode 9, that's the ending of not only just episode 9, but the ending of the sequel trilogy and the ending of all of Star Wars, all 9 episodes, that last scene, which I thought was done very well. I was happy with that. But overall, it didn't leave me, as I said, I need to walk away with complete closure. The episode, I don't think episode 9 necessarily left me with complete closure, but that scene did leave me with complete closure. And for that, it works. And then, 9 episodes of anything. I mean, that is a stretch. Let's pull it back a bit. Let's just pull it back and bring it to 3 movies. In particular, the Scream movies, 3 Screams. I wrote something. Every year I do 31 days of Halloween watching. I watch 31 movies in 31 days, which then grew to watching as many movies as I can in 31 days. My record was 50. This year I did 61, which is just unheralded. I've never done 61 movies in a month. As a matter of fact, so much so that I've pretty much not watched any movies in November, if you could believe it. I just sort of burnt out from watching too many movies, I guess. I don't know. I just can't make it through another movie. I hope that changes soon. But I rewatched Scream. I hadn't seen Scream for a long time. My local Alamo was supposed to do a Screamathon. We were going to have all 3 Screams at the Alamo Draft House, and I was really excited for that. Obviously, COVID happened, and that destroyed everything, and that didn't go down. So I was like, it's time to crack this Blu-ray box set that I had bought a while back. I was even like, man, I can't watch these Blu-rays because they're going to play it at the Alamo. I might as well just wait for the Alamo screening. Alamo screening doesn't happen. I go, all right, time to launch into these Blu-rays. So I crack it open, and it's funny. It was $10 for the set, and the reason why it was $10 for the set is because at the time, Scream 4 had not come out yet, or Scream 4 was about to come out. They put the 3 movies together without Scream 4, which I didn't realize at the time when I bought it. I thought I was buying all 4 movies. I only bought 3 movies. And you know what? In hindsight, I'm glad I did. Truly, I'm glad that I only bought 3 Scream movies, because to me, Scream really ends with the 3rd one. We don't need any more Screams. Enough screaming. It's done. You don't need it. At least you don't need the story of Sidney Prescott after Scream 3. If you want to continue Scream, you need to do it without Sidney. And yet at the same time, Sidney is so enmeshed in Scream, and we'll get to that in what I'm going to read to you now. But there's a good reason for that. I'll elaborate. I don't want to spoil it before we get there. But I will say that, I love Scream. Sidney Prescott is Neve Campbell. Sidney Prescott, she is my forever love. Okay, she is, to me, she's everything in a heroine, fighting against evil, I guess, or fighting to live, fighting to defeat. She's the ultimate final girl to me, more so than Laurie Strode, more so than anybody. She is my Laurie Strode. I'm going to read that in the thing too. She's the best, man. She's the best that ever was. She's the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And she's also the most interesting character. You know what I mean? She's also the most interesting final girl character. She has pathos, unlike all the other characters. And that's why I find her to be so interesting. And she has an arc. She actually has an arc through the Scream movies. It's not just a cookie cutter, one thing after another. I know it may seem like that on the surface, but it's so much deeper than that. And it's hard to compare something like Scream to Star Wars because Star Wars is this epic space saga, and Scream is a very singular story, really based on one person, Sidney, which I guess is an easier story to tell. In the same way that, how can anybody land Game of Thrones with all those open thread points? They did pretty well, all things considered, but there were so many ways that they could have taken it, and they simply chose not to, and just a bummer. Sucks. All right, enough of the preamble. I don't know how long I got before my daughter wakes up. My wife is teaching from home today because like I said, I had a COVID test. Nobody went to school. My son didn't go to school. I don't know how long I'm going to get through. I don't know if I'm going to get through this whole thing. I'm going to try. So let's do it. Let's launch into it now. So here's what I'm going to read to you. So I wrote this. So going back to the 31 days, part of doing the 31 days is logging each movie and writing a little something about it. It's just something I do. It's a tradition. It helps me feel the holiday of Halloween, which really begins the beginning of October. It doesn't begin on, last week of October for me. My decorations go up September 1st, and the movie watching starts October 1st. And sometimes when I'm writing, because here's the thing, I can write as much as I can talk. And I can talk a mother effer. I can talk. Sometimes when I feel really inspired and I feel the passion, I can write, really, truly write. And an idea, a kernel of something, it goes from what can go from a simple Facebook status, could turn into a Facebook post, which can then turn into its own essay. And that's what's happened here today. And I submitted this essay to a couple websites, and I was thinking about putting it up on my blog. And I thought, let me do something a little different. I'm going to go on the Jeff Show, and I'm going to read it and talk about it as I read it. And that will be my meditation. And I've got a nice clickbaity title. Scream 3 is how I would have ended Star Wars, which will make a lot of people mad, I would assume. And I'm just going to go into this. Let's launch into it. And maybe I'll break and explain myself as I read the writing. I don't know if that's good. So this is my revisiting Scream 3 essay that I have now titled Scream 3 is how I would have ended Star Wars. I finished it on October 30th of this year. I say this a lot, but it needs to be said here as well. Scream was my Halloween growing up. Sidney Prescott was my Laurie Strode, and Neve Campbell was my forever love. And though I will watch any installment that comes our way, and that's true, I will watch any Scream movie that comes out because I love Scream, and I love Neve Campbell, and I love Sidney Prescott. Even if they're going to destroy the character or hurt the character or whatever, I'll still watch it. You know why? Because I love that world. I love that. I love those characters. It's like Friends. It's like Scooby-Doo Friends. It's like a Scooby-Doo Friends slasher in the 90s. I don't know. It jump-started its own genre, when you think about it. And though I will watch any installment that comes our way, I think Scream was always meant to be nothing but a trilogy about a final girl and a genius statement on the pop culture of horror films. in order to retain their brilliance, these films cannot overstay their welcome. Like anything, like any good story, it cannot overstay the welcome. Scream 4 overstays the welcome, for sure. Even if there is more to say about the genre, Scream and its two sequels pretty much covered it all. True. I mean, yes, the opening to Scream 4 is brilliant. I love the opening to Scream 4. It's fun, but it works as like a 5-minute YouTube video that is like you know how sometimes like they'll do supplemental, like, you know, Macaulay Culkin will revisit Home Alone as an adult or something. It's like that's all you need it to be. This doesn't need its own film. You know, it doesn't deserve, the commentary doesn't necessarily deserve its own film. I don't know. Maybe. Actually, I think they did have more to say, but so I'll always think of it as just 3 movies, especially because of the immaculate final scene. You can't beat it. So here I am talking about the final scene, the immaculate final scene of Scream 3, which I love, love, love. And we will, I guess I'll have to pull that up as well, although I don't want to get copyright hit for it. But whatever, I'll find it if I can and upload that. Just like how we never understood Courtney Cox's bangs, and yes, we can make endless jokes about the bangs in Scream 3. I will never understand why the third film gets such a bad rap in the first place, especially in light of the fourth entry. That's what baffles my mind. A lot of people have their Scream entries. There's Screams. Here we go. I found it, but I'm not gonna. All right, we'll leave it. We have it, but I'm not gonna post it. It's on my. Sometimes I do Instagram videos of scenes from films that I really like, and then post them to Instagram. So I took that part, so it's there. We can look at it. We won't play the sound. Yeah, I some people have like these Scream, like their placings for Scream, and it's like 1 4 3 1 4 2 3 or 1 2 4 3. Like 3 is always in last, and I just don't get that. 4 should be in last. It goes in the order 1 2 3 4. That's my order. The first Scream is the best. Scream 2 is the second best. Scream 3 is the third best, and Scream 4 is in fourth place. Or you don't have to call it the third best, Scream 3 the third best, because it's not really, I don't know if it's best by those standards, but Scream 2 is brilliant. There's a lot of brilliant stuff going on in Scream 2, which I will explain as we talk. So I don't get it. Why does Scream 3 get such a bad rap? I don't get it, especially after what we got in Scream 4. The meta writing still works, especially with the third wheel rivalry dynamic between Parker Posey and our Lois Lane of the 90s, Gale Weathers, because that's who Courtney Cox is. She is channeling Lois Lane, but for a 90s news anchor reporter lady person. And I loved the rivalry dynamic between Parker Posey and Gale Weathers, Courtney Cox, which I didn't pick up on. I mean, they do the same thing in the fourth entry with the deputy Dewey character, who's now this girl who's in love with Dewey, kind of, although it's not really spoken. And there's speculation that in Scream 5, she's going to be married to Dewey, and Gale and Dewey will be divorced, as the Scream movies kind of mimic what happens to Courtney Cox and David Arquette in real life, from falling in love to getting married and then perhaps getting separated. So who knows? We will see how they choose to play that out. Putty from Seinfeld, he calls David Arquette, he refers to Dewey as Dewdrop. That's so great. It's so cute. There are tons of fun cameos. You get Linda Blair. Roger Corman makes a cameo. You get Jay and Silent Bob doing a cameo. They're just tons of quirky, fun cameos. Randy even finds a way to make an appearance and set up the rules for the final film. You know, a lot of people groan at Randy returning, but I mean, come on. Is it not beyond the realm of possibility that Randy would make such a ridiculous tape? I've heard that there's over 2 hours of like ad-libbing that he did as Randy for that very, very small, what is he? He's on screen for like a minute or two. And it really does sort of bring back the whole meta. It's like a meta thing. They're literally being explained the rules by a dead guy from beyond the grave. They're being explained the rules for the third movie in a trilogy. So there's somehow that universe, the physics of that universe operate by those rules, even though it's the real world. And that's what's so kind of like crazy, quirky, interesting, yada yada yada, using lots of descriptors that don't really fit the shoe, but trying to keep talking as I talk. However, there was a missed opportunity to have Dion Richmond absorb Randy's place through his in the movie Randy-esque Stab 3 characters. So Black Dude becomes the new Randy in the movie within the movie. And that's the thing about the Scream sequels that is so great. How do you continue on and make things more interesting in the sequel to something like Scream, which is like already self-aware and making fun of the genre? You turn that film into a movie within a movie and call it Stab. And then how do you go another level on top of that? You skip the movie. You skip Stab 2. So we're not going to repeat ourselves by going, oh, Stab 2. We're actually making a prequel called Stab 3, Return to Woodsboro in LA. We're going to have these characters we're going to have characters. So it's like Parker Posey is playing an actress who's playing Gale Weathers, who is also sort of a thing with Dewey, who is also played by it just really, oh my God, it's just, there are so many dimensions to it that make it so fun. Why do people hate that? I get it. The original Scream 3 was a very interesting idea, which eventually got turned into a show called The Following, with Kevin Bacon. It was a TV series, and that was basically, there were a bunch of like fans of Stab who all conspired against Sidney, and it was a reveal at the end. They all are dead all over the house, the mansion. They all stand up at the same time, and the idea is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, and it would have worked really well, and they didn't go that way. They went this way, and for that, I think they are no less worse off. I think it works. Yeah, it's, it's rough around the edges in certain places. I didn't realize this. Nev Campbell kind of was like, I don't really want to do a third one, but I will. Can I do it if I only shoot 3 weeks? So she only shot 3 weeks on the movie. And, I never really noticed it until I was reading about it, but she's really not as in the movie as much. But here's the thing. Here's why that's okay. Because she shows up when it really matters. She shows up when it really matters and when it really has impact, especially at the end. And that's why that works for me, especially because Sidney at this point is kind of in hiding. I mean, there's 2 other leads, or co-leads, or backup leads, which are Dewey and Gale, and they kind of help pick up some of the slack, and it works. It works for me, for sure. It works for me. But to go back to the Randy thing, they had this guy. So they have Randy show up on the tape. Great. There's also this guy, Dion, who takes over Randy's place. And, he gets killed in the movie. And it's just kind of like, I kind of like boo that, because why kill off this, first of all, isn't it such a cliche to kill off the black guy, which is like what, the movie made fun of in the previous, they literally made fun of the very thing that they do in the third movie. And Scream is supposed to be better than that, or at least it's supposed to be winking at you when it does it. And that's not happening in either or in Scream 3. He just dies because he needs to die. Why not make him live? Why not have him embrace the Randiness of who he's trying to be in Stab 3 and have that help him to survive the movie? That was a missed opportunity, in my opinion. Also, who cares if it's dripping in Scooby-Doo? That's a huge complaint that this movie feels like Scooby-Doo, but they all have a Scooby-Doo aspect to them. And the Scooby-Doo aspect to them is the same as a term, giallo. As a matter of fact, let's look it up. Giallo. Let's see what comes up here. Giallo. All right. So giallo is an Italian term designating mystery fiction. The word giallo is Italian for yellow. The term derives from a series of cheap paperback mystery novels with yellow covers that were popular in Italy. In the context of 20th century literature and film, especially amongst English speakers and non-Italians in general, giallo refers specifically to a particular Italian thriller horror genre that has a mystery or a detective elements and often contains a slasher, criminal fiction, psychological thriller, psychological horror, sexploitation, psychedelic, and less frequent supernatural horror elements. I think, and that is a huge trope for Scream, right? So people are confusing some of the, it's like Giallo for children or Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is Giallo for children in the sense, sets up a mystery with a horrific element or a spooky or scary element, and you got to figure out who's done it. And in Giallo, there's usually a killer with black gloves, but in the Scream movies, it's a killer with black hunting boots, right? You always see the black hunting boots, and you're like, oh, that's the killer. So they sort of straddle the same, there's like a Venn diagram where they overlap in that kind of way. And people think that it's kind of like Giallo. And I say, who cares if it's dripping with Scooby-Doo? They all have that element to varying degrees. In my previous musings on the first film, I had done a write-up on the first film. I realized that I may have been overreaching by using the term Giallo-esque to describe Scream and most of the other 90s teen slashers, because that's the thing. I was saying that, and I don't think I'm overreaching. I think it makes sense, especially when you read that definition. All the 90s teen slashers that came after Scream, starting in 96, really, you have it's like a mixture of Giallo, 80s slasher films, the hot 90s, teen heartthrobs of the time, and like meta self-aware writing. Those are all the things, the tropes that make up this period from 96 to 2002, maybe 2001, 2002, where you're getting all that kind of stuff. Perhaps it really is just a spoonful of Scooby-Doo's Who's Behind the Mask that makes this rated R series feel like a warm, fuzzy blanket that I want to wrap myself up in and enjoy some pure escapist fun. Because that's what Scream is to me. It's pure escapist fun. It's a comfort food. It's a warm, fuzzy blanket that I like to wrap myself up in. And that it just works. With everything that has happened, Sydney takes on a fake identity and hides away from the world. It is the only way she can escape from the Cassandrian, more on this later, prophecy. So Cassandra is a Greek tragedy, which we'll talk about, which ties into Scream 2. I kind of tricked you with the Star Wars stuff. I mean, it kind of, I'll tie that up at the end. You'll see. The only way that she can escape from the Cassandrian prophecy that has cursed her. It is the only way that she can escape from the Cassandrian prophecy that has cursed her life. If she hides alone, then she doesn't have to lose the people that she loves. She doesn't have to warn anyone who gets too close when their inevitable, that's like, yeah, never mind. Their inevitable fate will be. Sydney even finds meaning and purpose in this exile. She is a work-at-home, call line grief crisis counselor who helps other women with their trauma. It is noble work that probably has some therapeutic effect for herself. But even though she can't keep the world at bay, she doesn't account for the ghosts in the deep recesses of her own mind. The biggest one looming being her mother. And when Cotton dies at the beginning, spoilers, the ghost of Maureen Prescott bubbles to the surface. Up until this point, there have been no surreal elements in the series, and it totally works. Right. I mean, there's no dreams. There's nothing like surreal. There's nothing sort of like psychedelic or anything like that. It's just straight, someone is killing teens, and we're trying to get to the bottom of this. And this one kind of jumps the shark, really. But it's the cap of the trilogy. And it's Wes Craven trying to do things that he hasn't done before. It jumps the shark, and here we have this like we have a ghost. We have a ghost, but it's a ghost of the psyche. It's a psychological ghost. So it is a ghost story, and that's what's cool about Scream 3. It's a ghost story. It's a ghost story of Maureen Prescott's unfinished business, and the ghost comes to us through Sydney's mind and through Sydney's dreams. Which is very apropos for the guy who brought us Freddy Krueger and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Up until this point, there have been no surreal elements in the series, and it totally works. Instead of giving us a routine flashback, which I also have no problem with, we are treated to the haunted dreams, hallucinations even, of sorts from the guy who brought us to Elm Street. It brings the Ned Stark that we've only heard or seen in photos of it into an inescapable forefront. Ugh, I wrote that wrong. It brings the Ned Stark that we have only heard or seen in photos of into it's a yucky sentence. In photos of into the inescapable forefront. So yeah, so going back to Game of Thrones, Ned Stark, we only get him for 9 episodes, but we see him. His presence is felt throughout the entire series. For years more, we Ned Stark comes up in conversation, and it's almost like if Scream was like a Game of Thrones, there's all this stuff that happens before Scream. There's a whole movie there. There's a whole prequel. There's a whole saga that happens before we even get to the first Scream, and that is the death of Maureen Prescott and everything that Billy and Stu do. And even before that, everything that happens with Roman, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Kind of like doing exactly what episode 9 did in retrospect. So yeah, so it brings the Ned Stark to the forefront of it all. And it's like we start the movies. It's like, you know what it's like? It's almost like Maureen Prescott and the Ned Stark analogy. It's almost as if we started Scream, or it'd be like if Game of Thrones started in season 2 or season 3 and everything else. So everybody refers to Ned Stark, but we don't know. We never see him. And we never see him do anything. And that's what Marines. And then all of a sudden, Ned Stark becomes a ghost, a reoccurring ghost later on in Game of Thrones. That's kind of what happens in Scream 3. Touching again on the meta aspects, I love how the stab element is not only reused, but they jump a sequel and make it about returning to Woodsboro, where it all began, because that's where, as they talk about in the rules for the trilogy and whatnot, they talk about returning to the beginning, or where it all began, which is, I guess, where you want to go when you go on a long journey. A long journey sometimes can return to the beginning after so much has happened and brings things full circle. And once you go full circle, you can have the catharsis you need and move on or end things or whatever. And so bringing it back to Woodsboro, in a sense, through the sets is kind of an interesting story element. It allows Sydney to come home without thinking that she actually has. Sydney has always been locked into fate, it seems. She is confronted with this overwhelming realization when she visits the Woodboro sets and sits in her own bedroom, listening to echoes of Billy rattle around in her head as she relives what ended up being one of her last moments of normalcy before it started ... again. And what I mean by that is it was starting again even in Scream 1. And one of the last moments that she had as a normal teenager, her life would change again forevermore. It changed the first time when Maureen was killed. But, a year passed and she went back to her normal teenage life in high school. But forevermore, her existence would be changed when Billy and Stu started up again a year later to finish off what they had started. And, I don't think I really talk about it here. Well, here, let me get to this first. And that was the brilliance of Scream. It set up a whole movie's worth of events a year before the beginning, which not only sets Sydney off to start the series, but also allows things to come full circle so that it can wrap up with a nice trilogy bow. It also presents its own problems. Like Kill Bill or episodes 4 through 6, once I watch Scream, I have to watch part 2 and part 3 in order to take in the whole story, in order to feel a sense of closure, which is what I talked about. Once I start with Scream 1, I have to watch Scream 2 and I have to watch Scream 3. I have to see Sydney's story play out all the way through to the end. I just have to do it. I have to get to that final scene at the end, which brings me closure that Sydney is okay, that we can leave her story now because she's going to be okay because of that scene. I know it sounds crazy for a fictional character, but we care about these characters. We care about the stuff, this geeky, nerdy SHIT, it's ours, and we love it. So yeah. In another great nod to the first film, Sydney uses her door trick, and the killer comes through the window, mirroring how she didn't realize that the killer was her boyfriend. Was under blah, 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 blah. Mirroring how she didn't realize that the killer, her boyfriend, was under her suspicious nose as he effed with her mind the whole damn time. So that is pretty cool in Scream 3. So once again, she does the same thing. She thinks the killer's coming through the door. She does the door trick where she puts one door, her closet door, up against her bedroom door, and they jam together, creating this triangle barricade that doesn't allow the person in. And what happens? Roman, dressed as Ghostface, crashes through the window just in the way that Billy scared the crap out of Sydney the second time after she calls 911 over her weird, like, proto instant messenger, like, computer service. And the whole time, right under her nose, Billy was the killer. Billy, her boyfriend. And it's just the same thing. She's making the same mistakes that she did all those years later in her bedroom. And it's someone that the killer turns out to be someone incredibly close to her, her own half brother that she didn't realize that she had, in the same way that the killer was her boyfriend, who she was intimate with and would become more intimate with towards the end of the film. In fact, it does seem that Billy did succeed in his goal. On some level, he wanted to turn their lives into a movie like all of the ones that he watched. And now, here is Sydney in her Hollywood bedroom set as her real-life story has been turned into a slasher movie franchise, directed by her killer brother, who put everything into motion in the first place. How does that not work? How does that not work? How do people groan at the idea of this element? I think it works, man. It's a retroactive element in the sense that it was written. It's like, it's sort of revised history, because it really started with Billy and Stu, and this sort of adds another wrinkle that kind of could make you go, does that really work? I'm not really sure. It works, man. It works in the same way that, it works in the same way that it excruciatingly almost works in episode 9. It doesn't work in episode 9 with Emperor Palpatine. Palpatine would have worked in episode 9 if you had brought him in episode 1. You can't just throw a hardball like that in episode 9. Palpatine's supposed to be dead. In this case, it's a little bit different, because it really does, the half brother really does bring it back to the beginning, and all that stuff. And what's interesting is there's this overarching theme that happens over and over again, where everybody just seems to project all of their anger and blame onto Sydney, which is symbolic of, we're going to project our anger and frustration onto the victim. Sydney is a victim of circumstance. She's a victim, and that's not to say that she's a weak person or anything. I'm just saying she is the victim. Or she is a victim of these crimes, and people project their anger and frustration. Sydney takes on so much throughout this series, and so many people die because of this missense place of needing to blame Sydney Prescott. It turns out that the ultimate catharsis that Sydney needs to find everlasting peace is only going to come by confronting the ghost of her mother and all of the secrets that she left behind. This includes the biggest secret of all, a half-brother via Hollywood executive gang rape assault from the time that Maureen pursued an acting career. Sydney acted in college, meaning that she did follow in her mother's footsteps. And, this character, Lance Hendrickson, plays like a sleazier version of Roger Corman, who, had his casting couch. And, yes, and that's the other thing too. Scream 3 is starting to get a little bit of a resurgence, in the sense that people are realizing that it was way ahead of the time, that it literally is talking about what is actually happening in the studio, that dimension is owned by the Weinstein brothers, all that going on. I'm not going to make this video about that, but it's just interesting how the foreboding was there. Also, another tie to it, another thread is Rose McGowan, who plays Tatum, Dewey's sister, who gets killed in the first movie, and she was raped by Harvey Weinstein. And now here's the third film in that series tackling what really happened in real life. So I don't know. That's another element there. So what it really comes down to is, in this way, Scream 3 is in fact not just a Scooby slasher mystery, but it's also a ghost story, a Scooby slasher ghost mystery, if you will, which is what I kind of talked about. The series and all of its villains and conflicts, the series and all of its villains and the conflicts they bring are centered around shame, or centered on shame around sex, sexual crimes, sexual promiscuity, and infidelity, good or bad. So whether the infidelity is good or bad, everything, all of the hate, and this is like the legacy of the 80s slashers. If you have sex, you get killed, which is what Randy sets up for us in the very first film. Starts off with the Halloween series and beyond. But yes, all of the villains and their conflicts, everything is centered around the shame about sex. And a woman stepping outside of her marriage and having extramarital affairs, and being assaulted and raped and all this stuff. And then it's like everybody blames her. So everybody blames this woman for either being sexual or being raped. And that's just that's saying a whole nother level of things about the Scream movies and what's going on in Scream. And then here's the thing about Billy. Billy is obviously a combination of a lot of things. Mainly, he is Norman Bates, Anthony Perkins, in Psycho, who he quotes when he's talking about the we all go a little mad sometimes. His relationship with his mother, his relationship with his mother around issues of sex, which I'm going to talk about right now. It begins in the first film with Billy punishing Sidney because she has never given him the one thing that he wants, the one thing that Sidney's mother, Maureen Prescott, gave freely to Billy's father, causing his own mother, Mrs. Loomis, to leave. Sex. What a Freudian pretzel that is. And he can't feel complete or perhaps have any closure until she puts out for his incel ass, thus allowing her to break the golden rule of horror movie virginity and die. And as it turns out, Sidney's secret long-lost brother, Emperor Palpatine, this whole thing. And it works for me. What can I say? Just to touch back on the Billy Loomis thing, because I talk about this really in that first Scream movie. I sort of talk about in this write-up. So Billy is really psychotic. Not only does he rape and kill his mother, the mother of his girlfriend, but he then projects all of the feelings about all that stuff with his mother and Maureen and yada, yada, yada onto Sidney, whom he's trying to have a sexual relationship with. So you have issues of intimacy with significant others, probably mixed up with issues of intimacy from mothers, and and how it relates to his father. It's so mangled. And then what does he do? He starts killing people around Sidney to freak her out. He's ready to kill her dad. He's already killed her mom. And makes her almost gets caught doing it. Because here's the other thing. These guys are sloppy, and it's scary. It's so scary how sloppy the Ghostface killers are. They all are. They're all sloppy in some way. I'd say Roman is probably the least sloppiest. But they get, they trip over stuff. They get hit with doors. They get hit with beer bottles. They are not the stealthy Jason, Michael, Freddy-like killers that they're trying to emulate from the 80s. They are clumsy, goofy people wearing a off the rack Halloween costume, which is what makes Ghostface so scary. I don't know if I'm going to be overlapping onto, oh man, I hope I'm not. Yeah, I think I might be. Which is what makes Ghostface so scary, in the sense I'm paraphrasing from another thing I wrote. You have this moniker that really allows one person to become anonymous with a knife or whatever. You put on a mask, you can become this thing that goes out, this malevolent force that can go out and murder other people. It allows you to maybe murder, and allows you to sort of lose yourself in the identity of really nothing, of death, because that's what the Ghostface is based on. It's based on the Howling, a generic version of Father Death. So people are becoming death incarnate in order to carry out these homicidal desires or these homicidal compulsions that they feel for whatever motivates them to do so. And everybody's motive is slightly different or varied. And it starts with Billy and Stu. These, like, it's just so scary, man. It's so real. Two high school kids inspired by horror movies and a real life incident with Billy's mother to go out, Billy's mother and father and Maureen Prescott to go out and, commit these heinous acts and then try and frame themselves as the heroes of the story by stabbing each other. I mean, it's just nuts. It's nuts. And then he does it again. He tries to throw her off again by getting killed by Stu, fake killed by Stu after he's slept with her and taken her virginity. And then only to fall down the stairs and reveal that he's the killer the whole time. And, yes, it's like screenwriting red herrings left and right, but it works, man. It works. That first Scream film is flawless, man. It is probably my favorite slasher, one of my favorite horror films for sure. It works on so many levels. So I said, and as it turns out, Sidney's secret long-lost brother, Emperor Palpatine. So there's your Star Wars reference, Emperor Palpatine. But here's the difference between what Star Wars and that does right versus what it does wrong. Sidney's secret long-lost brother, Emperor Palpatine, this whole thing. And it works for me. What can I say? I don't think this takes away from any of the mechanics of the first film either. However, if you are looking beyond it to a trilogy of films, if you're looking beyond the first film, it's actually like an STD. So this was an epiphany to me. It's like a sexually transmitted disease. But instead of sexually transmitted disease, it's a shame transmitted disease. That's what's happening. It's a shame STD. It really starts with Maureen and the orgy gang rape she experiences in Hollywood. When her son comes knocking on her door, she transfers the shame around what happened to him by rejecting him. In her eyes, he's a lasting legacy to that piece of life that she would rather forget. Roman then passes the shame transmitted disease to Billy with Stu, the impressionable sidekick. And you could write such a good prequel story about the seduction of Billy, in the same way that Emperor Palpatine seduced Anakin Skywalker, so too could Roman seduce Billy into carrying out this thing. So Billy is a psychotic. He's unhinged, and he just needs a little push. Because at the end of the day, what is the little push? His motive is your mother slept with my dad, causing my mom to leave. Who puts all that into Billy's head in the first place? Who puts that into Billy's head and then transfixes it onto Sidney? You know what I'm saying? That's a little bit of a jump. But when you have a sibling, an unknown sibling who's probably incredibly jealous of all the love and affection that a legitimate child gets, and again, tying it into the Game of Thrones, you have the bastard who's resentful of the rightfully born child. It's all connected, baby. Star Wars, Game of Thrones, Scream. It's all connected. It's a Scream, baby. Here you have the bastard, encouraging Billy to carry the stuff out, maybe because at the time Roman's not going to do it himself, or Roman wants to have this revenge. What better way to frame someone by having them commit the actual thing and then convincing them to be, do this in their own right. It works for me, man. So Roman comes knocking. She transfers that shame around what happened to him by rejecting him. In her eyes, he's a lasting legacy to that part of her life that she'd rather forget. Roman then passes the shame transmitted disease to Billy with Stu, the impressionable sidekick, and Billy and Billy's dad pass it along to Mrs. Loomis. It all works, man. So Scream becomes very plausible. All the killers and their motivations, they all become plausible through this idea of the passing of shame, kind of like an STD, but shame around sex. It totally freaking works. It's a movie spanning chain reaction. And by the end of Scream 3, Sidney has reached the source of it all, which is her brother, her half-brother. And there's only one thing left to do as she yells at him to just admit his killing of people is no one's fault but his own. If it started with Roman, then it must end with him too. Like Beatrix Kiddo, Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. Sidney needs to rid herself of the past in order to have a future. She must kill Bill, her brother, and confront, accept, and excise the secrets of her mother's ghost-like unfinished business. And through it all, as Roman is dying, there's this touching. Well, before I get to that, let's go back to the Kill Bill for a second. So that's what it is, man. That's what it is. It's that's what I love about Kill Bill. Kill Bill, the idea of killing Bill is not just about getting revenge on Bill. She has to kill Bill because Bill represents her past self. Bill represents the past Beatrix. It's really a suicide of one's former self. So that in order for her to become the mother that she is, she needs to kill the killer that's inside of her. And that killer happens to be Bill, which lives inside of her heart. As in he seduced her and stole her heart and took her heart and yada, yada, yada. And so the way that she confronts that is by cutting her way through every facet of her own life, old life. And now Sydney must do the same. She must cut out this rotten piece of her that's always been there, but she never knew what it was. And when she does that, she can be free. And through it all, as Roman is dying because they don't actually kill him, he doesn't actually die in that moment. There's this touching acknowledgement of his connection to Sydney in the form of holding hands as he dies. So Sydney finishes him off and he's dying and they grasp each other's hands. And it's like this silent, like, because there's no dialogue that's going to work and work for that in that moment. It's just the silent acknowledgement of, you're my brother and it's a shame, we're blood and you have to go, but we're blood and I love you because you're my blood, or something like that. I don't know, even with everything that had happened. Very, very interesting, very touching. And the acknowledgement of that connection is validation. It's the validation. So when Sydney acknowledges his presence, that's the validation that Maureen Prescott, her mother, never gave to her son. That is the unfinished business of the ghost of Maureen Prescott. By embracing Roman in that moment, she is completing the sins of the mother, in the sense of not for the sex stuff, but in the sense of rejecting her child. She embraces the child that her mother rejected, allowing him to let go, although he doesn't, because they ruin it in the next frame with what happens next, which really annoys me. Without wanting to put this weight or blame on Maureen, because what he did isn't her fault. What Roman did should not be blamed on Maureen Prescott. Maureen Prescott may have been a hoe, but she was a hoe for her own reasons. We don't know. We don't know what her marriage was like. We don't know to Sydney's father. You just don't know, and she was kind of promiscuous before that for whatever reasons. Again, we put a lot of shame around promiscuity. But without wanting to put this weight or blame on Maureen, because what Roman did and what Billy did isn't her fault. Maybe Billy and Sydney would have ended up as married high school sweethearts. Isn't that a crazy thought to think? Like, if none of this stuff had happened, if Maureen hadn't rejected Roman and sent Roman on the spiral, but I mean, Billy was always unhinged. It just took that situation to snap him. So who knows what would have happened? But that was an interesting idea in my mind. What is a shame? The ruining of the sibling embrace with the need to stay on brand, with the killer might return for one last scare. We didn't need it. It was fun for the first two films. Doing it again overwrites the significance of their touching, conflicting embrace. So that's what I'm saying. By having him come back and do that whole thing about wanting to kill, and then, they're saying, Dewey, shoot him in the head. It just ruins it, man. It ruins what that scene right before it ruins the final arc. So in that way, Star Wars and that, they kind of have that in common a little bit. I also noticed something else with this most recent viewing of Scream 3. Although it's truly never really explored, I think it's also crazy not to deduct that Roman's father is in fact John Milton. That's the Lance Henriksen character played by Lance. Sorry. That's the character played by Lance Henriksen, John Milton. He's the Roger Corman type. This is how he became a director. This is how Roman became a director. So this is like, and John Milton probably has a separate family. This is a bastard, the House of Milton, right? He's this studio executive. So there you go with the Game of Thrones reference again. He's a studio executive who had taken Roman must have been under some sort of care or ward of Milton, perhaps even outside of a marriage and family that he might have had, a dirty secret that Milton kept hidden in plain sight. Another interesting element is Detective Kincaid. So this is the detective that protects Sidney. He's the closest thing to anything that could be construed as a love interest for Sidney, and in fact totally takes a backseat to the much more pressing and important focus of the story and Sidney's character arc. So here's the crux of the arc that happens in the overall trilogy of the Scream films. Ready? You got to stay with me on this. In Scream 2, Sidney plays Cassandra from the classical Greek tragedy. In her mythology, Cassandra's mythology, she is cursed to always tell the truth with no one believing her. It is the embodiment of Sidney's own prophecy that started the first film. Stay away from me, or you will get badly hurt, or most likely die. So stay away from me, or you will get badly hurt, or you will most likely die. And whether it is through her boyfriend Derek's love, or Randy's unrequited devotion, or Dewey's sense of simply sibling-esque duty, none of them listen to the warning and they pay the price. So Randy gets killed for not staying away. Dewey gets sliced and diced twice in 2 movies. He gets cut up, and Derek gets shot in the chest. And they all die or get disabled. It is a huge part of what must fuel her isolation in part 3. It was also Wes Craven's idea and a masterstroke to make such a classical juxtaposition between Sidney and Cassandra. So I love that. So in Scream 2, my favorite scene is the drama scene where they're putting on the play Cassandra. Sidney is now an actress like her mother once was, or as we would find out in Scream 3. And she's doing the play, and we see she actually, I guess that is, we don't know if that's a hallucination or not. She kind of sees Ghostface in the faces of these tragedy masks, these Greek, because Ghostface kind of looks like a Greek tragedy mask. It kind of looks like the drama and comedy mask. It's like the Ghostface. Man, that would be a good tattoo. You have the comedy and the drama of Ghostface, and to take it one step further, then you have Scary Movie with the, you know what I mean? So it's like you get comedy and you get drama with Ghostface. It's an interesting little paradigm. But I love that scene with David Wagner. He's great. He's so brilliant in that. And he's telling Sidney that she is a survivor and that she must survive and that she must do her thing despite everything that's happening to her, the resurgence of a Ghostface killer. And Sidney listens to her and goes on with the play rehearsal. And as they're doing the rehearsal, a character comes down, which would later be replaced by Derek's dead body on the cross. Derek dies in this Christ-like death. He, literally dies for somebody else's sins, or dies for the sins of mankind in that kind of weird way. And she becomes a target. And she's a dance. Ned Campbell's a dancer, so she does this little dance thing in the scene. It's great. It's really, really great, and it really sets up this idea of Cassandrian tragedy within the character arc of Sidney Prescott. So I love that. Going back to Kincaid, meeting Kincaid, obviously maybe a nod to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. Changes all of that. Like Sidney, his favorite scary movie is his life as a homicidal detective. She says to him, "What's your favorite scary movie?" Something that was once asked to her in Scream 1, and his answer is "My life." He has seen his own share of death, and it has left its own scars that might align with Sidney's. He also survives the final Ghostface encounter, although he almost didn't in other versions of the other endings that were shot. He survives the final Ghostface encounter and takes a knife to the shoulder for Sidney in the process. So like the way that Randy takes a bullet to the shoulder, so too does Kincaid take a wound to his shoulder as well. And I don't know, I guess what's the difference between why Randy dies and Kincaid lives? But he does live. It galvanizes his ability to fully understand her past trauma, and any kind of future that they might be able to have together. And this was something that she and Derek, her boyfriend, played by Jerry O'Connell, is a great character and does this whole great number. I think I love you. He does the I think I love you song on the tables. There's a great cover by Less Than Jake, the ska punk band, who do it for that soundtrack. Scream 2 has a great soundtrack. And yeah, that is something that Sydney and Derek struggled with, what her past trauma and what kind of future that they might be able to have together. And the ability to fully understand her. It is my understanding that his romantic presence was purposely toned down, and that there are versions where he actually dies in the third act. I love the way that they have it in the movie, because here's the thing, as I said, the closest thing to a romantic interest, because Kincaid is actually, like, it's implied, but it's never actually said. And I like that. I like that it's not in your face. That's not what the movie is about. And we don't need that for Sydney. Sydney doesn't need anybody. She can stand on her own, so I kind of like that. That worked for me. I love the way that they have it in the movie. It is left unsaid, but like Milton's connection to Roman, easily implied. So like the way that Milton is most likely Roman's father, and it's implied as such, it's also implied that she and Kincaid might wind up together, especially when he turns up with Dewey and Gail at Sydney's house in the final scene. All right, here we go. This is my favorite part, and I'm gonna play it for you now without the sound, okay? Because we can't use sound. So you can see that? Not really. Ugh, it's so small. Wait, let's make this a little bigger. So there's Sydney walking up her gate. She leaves the gate open. She doesn't lock the gate. She doesn't put the code in. She's walking up to the house. There's some a swelling of music. It's wonderful. She opens the door. She's super relaxed. There's a picture of her mother on her nightstand. The past is always going to be there. It's Sydney's life. Sid, we've been waiting for you. We're going to start a movie, says Kincaid. What kind of movie? You'll have to come and see, says Kincaid. There's Dewey and the newly engaged Dewey and Gail and Kincaid, and he's got his arm in his slash. And then the door swings open and there's a breeze, but there's no scary music. And Sydney just looks at it. And she's like, nah, I'm good. Boom. And she walks out, man. And that's the end. That's the end. It so works for me, man. It's like the perfect ending. That's the end of Scream. We don't need anything else. That's enough. That's enough. That's it. That's the ending. You don't have to give us anything more than that. Okay. So, and here's what I wrote about it. By far the best part of Scream 3 is the final scene. It is a result of all the transformation that Sydney undergoes through the trilogy. Just as she is going to watch a movie with her friends, an unknown wind opens the door to her house. But it's the movie's physics. But the movie's physics, because you know how, like, movies, as soon as something scary is going to happen, scary music comes. That's movie physics. Oh, scary music. Therefore, we should expect something scary is going to happen. We don't get that. There's nothing. It's just a breeze of wind. You know what I mean? The movie's physics don't add any incidental score to suggest a thrilling element is coming. There's no one last scare. It's truly over. Instead, there is silence as Sydney knows that it is nothing but the wind and that she is free of everything that was weighing her down and imprisoning her. She is okay to leave it open to the whole world, because that's what she was doing. She was closing herself off to the world, and now she's opening herself to the world. No longer does she need to lock it out. Perfect. It's the perfect ending. That's it. How are people not satisfied with that? Why the hate? Why? Nothing makes me happier than feeling such closure. It's a beautiful ending for the ultimate final girl story, because that's what this is, baby. It's not, there's no killer. The killer is not what draws us to Scream. What draws us to Scream is Sydney, the final girl, and struggling with whoever might be trying to kill her in her life. It's a final girl story. Here's my afterthought. Part 4, because then what happened, of course, I went on. I had to watch part 4. It was streaming on Netflix. So I was like, fuck it. It's been a while. I'm going to watch part 4. I'm going to see what I'm going to revisit and see how bad it truly was. I've only seen part 4 twice. Okay, that's how much I don't like part 4. I am not a fan of part 4. Matter of fact, let me see if I can pull this up. Scream 4. See if we can find what was written here. This will tell you how much I don't like part 4 if it will turn up posts. Here we go. Found it. Ready for this? As soon as it loads. This is my third time watching Scream 4 since it came out. Well, first let me read this. Afterthought. Part 4 ruins all of this by turning what should have been a final girl trilogy about someone surviving and then overcoming her traumas into a franchise about a killer totem that endlessly endures. No different from the movies that Scream is doing a commentary on. It's easy to ignore Scream 4 and only watch the trilogy. But knowing that there is a part 5 on the way inspires me to have an open mind and see where they might go with things, because as we would find out with what was supposed to happen with Scream 4 and what might happen with Scream 5, the story doesn't end there. And here are my thoughts on Scream 4. This is my third time watching Scream 4 since it came out. It has been a letdown every time. It was a great idea and could have been an incredible requel if the execution was better and the Weinstein tampering didn't happen. But once the credits rolled, I decided that Scream works best as a contained trilogy, telling the arc of the greatest final girl there ever was. Hold on, let me just pull this up here so you can see it. This is my final entry for Scream 4. It works best as a contained trilogy telling the arc of the greatest final girl there ever was. Scream 4 undoes all of that in a less than genuine way that doesn't feel epic in the least. If you're going to pass the baton, it must be to characters that have depth and dimension, characters we grow to love over the course of the running time. Instead, we get superficial archetypes that have no personality. They just go through the motions of the script. Of everyone who is introduced, it is Deputy Hicks, Jill, and Kirby that almost work. So Deputy Hicks is the one that maybe she'll be the love interest of Dewey in Scream 5. And she kind of like has like a rivalry, that same rivalry that Parker Posey had with Gale, Deputy Hicks has with Gale. But they do this thing where Hicks saves Gale's life at the end, which is a really likable character trait. And I really enjoyed it thoroughly. They feel tired and maybe even a little sluggish because you woke them up from their well-earned happily ever after. That's what here we go. Sadder still is Sidney, Gale, and Dewey to a lesser extent. I said Dewey to a lesser extent. They feel tired and maybe even a little sluggish because you woke them up from their well-earned happily ever after. Neve Campbell in particular groans and limps through the film. This is such a bummer for me. It felt like she didn't want to be there. She was a million miles away as the character work she had developed in the last 2 films has evaporated, and she is nothing more than a helpless victim survivor. That is not the Sidney Prescott we know and love. It just didn't work. And because of the tampering, the baton didn't get passed to Jill, which would have been a really interesting reversal for the next 2 films. Instead, she is killed off, and our main 3 lead OGs just stare at each other and, this is Wes Craven's final film. This is how Wes Craven ends his cinematic legacy. Worst of all, as mentioned above, Scream 4 somewhat undoes all the stuff that goes down in Scream 3. When Sidney turns away from the door, we know that it is not over. We know that she is and her one possible chance for romantic happiness with Kincaid don't end up together. Gale gets demoted to bored retired housewife. Dewey is actually in a pretty good place. I appreciated the triangle between him and Hicks and Gale. Hicks, and Gale. I hope that Hicks comes back for part 5. I gotta say, after a revisit of part 4, I am nervous for part 5. Those filmmakers were solid. The Weinsteins are out of the picture, and hopefully Kevin Williamson will have some sort of producing role. I'm referring to Scream 5. The filmmakers are the guys who did Ready or Not, which is a really fun film that came out sort of with what's her name? Margot. No, that's not her. What's the Samara Weaving, who's kind of like the Margot, what's her name? The Harley Quinn character. His unused Scream 3 idea that turned into the following would have been perfect for a new trilogy. That's true. I just hope whatever happens, Sidney is left in a good place, and no matter what, I can always try my best to ignore the compulsion to keep going at the end of Scream 1, 2, and 3. So originally what's supposed to happen is Jill, Sydney's cousin, with her motives of wanting to become a famous final girl herself, steals this away by killing Sydney. Gets away with it. So Sydney would have died in part 4, which would have been interesting, which would have been so depressing, but also super interesting and super exciting for a new trilogy in terms of where they're gonna take things. And I think Gail would have died as well. So Gail and Sydney would have died. Dewey would have lived, and Dewey would have been suspicious of Jill, who's now basically becomes an anti-hero in the sense that the whole trilogy, Scream 4, 5, and 6, would have centered around Jill, the killer, trying to keep her thing, keep her lie that she establishes in the first movie of being the final girl when really she's the one who killed Sydney, in place. And that would have been interesting, except they killed her. They killed her in the movie at the end, and Sydney survives. And like I said, even more so, it was such an insult to the character of Sydney Prescott. She was just she groaned her way through the film. She just didn't want to be there. You could feel it, man. You could feel it. And I chatted a bunch with friends about it. It was my 58th film this Halloween. Okay, I have talked a lot. And then to finish it up, I guess to go back to my initial thing, although I think I'm going to change the title of this video because it really is not about how it would end Star Wars. I just said that. And really what it's about is Scream 3 is a great ending for the Scream trilogy. We really don't need anything anymore. Scream has a lot of deep stuff going on in it. Scream does share themes with both Star Wars and Game of Thrones and Kill Bill. And people should give more love to Scream 3 than it gets. If you enjoyed this long-winded content, or if there's something you'd like to see discussed on the Jeff Show, leave a comment, hit the like button. Please subscribe to this channel. These are great ways. There's a bunch of ways to support the creation of this content all below. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm exhausted from talking, and I have another show to do later today. So I will be back.